Yep, just record. And I will post it online. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you came back. That's great. That's great. So we've gotten a little bit off track because of last week with our schedule of what we were supposed to be talking about and when and everything. So like if you look on the syllabus tonight, we're going to be talking about Buddhism. That says Hinduism. We're going to do Buddhism next week. And it's going to be a little bit shortened next week, just so you know. Next week will only be an hour because at 7:30 I've got to go down. We have Grief Share at the same time. And I always go down in one of the weeks of Grief Share to do kind of the heaven talk and let people ask me questions. So you'll get to ask me questions about Buddhism, and then I'll switch gears and I'll go down and talk about heaven. So we're just going to shorten it just a little bit next week. Just wanted to let you know. And then the last week, then we're going to do a little bit of a hodgepodge of some different things. So let me start us off tonight with prayer, and then we'll kind of get into some stuff. So God, thank you so much for a chance to be here together. Thank you for a chance to continue to learn about you, to learn about our own faith, to learn about where our faith fits in alongside other faith traditions and what we can learn from one another and ways in which we find truth in you that, man, maybe we just don't find somewhere else. And we pray that you would just help us to continue to seek to know more, to learn more, so that we can grow closer to you and ultimately be more like Jesus, who came and found himself amongst a bunch of people who believed a bunch of different things and yet found a way to be able to minister to all of them. And so he's our example. He's the one we look to. So be with us tonight in our conversation. We love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right. So I kind of figured this would be the case. And it is that most of my conversations with you as we started off here tonight weren't so much about, hey, I had this question coming up about Hinduism. It was more like, can we talk a little bit about what just happened last week? Because that was kind of a wild thing, and it's still going on, isn't it? It's still going on. So here's what I want us to do. I want to do a little bit of a recap from last week. If you weren't here last week, Tarek came and spoke. He was born and raised in Gaza City, and would consider himself to be Palestinian. He is here, goes to Bluffton University. He's a grad student there, works in the Lion and Lamb Peace Arts Center, is getting his MBA right now, wants to do international business and wants to do stuff, kind of around political activism and peace and all of this kind of stuff, which that region, I don't know if you've been watching the news, could use a little bit of that. So I'm happy for people like him. And I'm sorry. So he works in something there called the Lion and Lamb Peace Arts Center. And so it's a Mennonite institution. A lot of things that revolve around pacifism. And so it actually has like a children's library and some different stuff that talks about nonviolence and things of that nature. So that's a part of where he works there. But so here's what I want us to do. And let me also just tell you a little bit of what happened after we left. So took him out to Circle of Friends for falafel with my family because that's what I told them I would do. Has anybody ever had falafel in here? Okay. It's this round ball. It's got usually like some, help me out, got like some meats, got some, but also has like chickpeas. That's what it is. Chickpeas in it. Couldn't think of, I wanted to say lentils, but I knew that wasn't right. Got chickpeas in it, all this stuff. And so I took him there, and he had it, because he hadn't been able to find falafel, and I said, how is it? And he said, it's the right shape. And that was about it. So which I thought was really funny. So it was great. But he was very appreciative, and we talked for a while, and family came and stuff, and it was really good. Took him back that night, and got a message from him on the way home that he had found out that he had lost some friends, probably while he was here with us in some of the continued fighting and bombings and things of that nature. So it's all just really difficult. And I have appreciated that. I feel like, at least in some of the news coverage I've been watching, that they've been trying to do a good job of helping to distinguish between Hamas and the 2 million Palestinian people who are there. One of the questions that was asked was that he danced around a little bit. You asked it was, well, how do you feel about Hamas? And there's a couple of reasons I think that he probably danced around it. Number one, it's, he wanted me to also be careful a little bit of what I talk about on social media and and all these kind of things. He's got friends and family there. He doesn't want any retaliation on anybody back home. I totally get that. Number two, and this is kind of where it gets a little bit more confusing for us. When we think the word Hamas, all that we think about is the guys with the rocket launchers, right? So, but there's also a part of the reason guys like that get to be in charge there is because they don't just do the rocket launcher thing, but sometimes they'll set up a school, and sometimes they'll help find ways to give water to a community, build good faith, and things like that. So that's obviously not the part that we usually see, and it doesn't excuse the rocket launchers. It doesn't excuse any of that kind of stuff, but it does give just a little bit of a different picture of some of those things. So I think where he eventually got to, if you go back and watch it, where he eventually gets to is he says, there's this really militant wing of Hamas that is that we just don't like, that's just not good, and we can't stand by them. So I thought that was fascinating, and I learned a lot from him. Didn't agree with everything he said, and that's okay. But I wanted us to be able to hear his perspective a little bit. So here's how I want us to start out. I think we just need to still kind of recap just a little bit of that. My guess is you all still have some questions. My guess is you probably left with more questions than what you came in with. That tends to be what happens when we learn stuff from each other. So I want you to turn to 2, 3, 4 people around you and just ask yourselves some of these questions. What's one thing you learned? What's maybe a question, and you don't have to do all of these things, but these are just some prompts for you. Maybe what's a question that came out of the conversation that we had last week? How has his new perspective challenged the way that you've watched events unfold? I think one of the things that's been really interesting is I've had several people message me throughout the week, just say, hey, just checking in, is this family still okay? Like, you kind of watch it a little bit different when you know somebody who has loved ones in the border, right? So how has it maybe changed the way you've watched events unfold? And then maybe a question that I really want to say, because this is a comparative religion class. You are Christian people out here. This is a part of why we're doing this is to grow our faith. So what is at the intersection of this conflict and your faith as a Christian? So what I mean by that is this conflict that's going on and your faith as a Christian, where do those two things meet? Where do those two things intersect? And how do you as a Christian maybe respond to what you see? How is it challenging some of your questions about faith? How is it maybe molding you a little bit? Where is it pushing? Where is it stretching you? How do you see your faith related to the conflict itself that's happening? Okay? So some kind of abstract questions, but that's okay. This is a college level course. We do abstract questions here. Okay? So I want you to turn to 2, 3, 4 people around you and just have some discussion about this. What'd you learn? What are questions you have coming out of this conversation? Ready, go. All right, let's go ahead and kind of come back, and I want to hear about your discussion, whether some of the things that you guys talked about, maybe questions you had or things you learned, what was kind of your conversation? Who wants to share? I know you were talking about stuff. I could hear you. You're blaming it on the British? Good. There's none of them here to defend themselves. That's great. That's great. Anybody else? What's something you guys talked about? What was me? Yeah.
We were talking,
You have to use the microphone. Sorry.
Teacher voice.
yeah. We were talking about how we're all very grateful for just the fact that we were born where we were born, because by the grace of God, this is where we were born. We could be living over there now, so
Yeah. I mean, we're pretty lucky to be where we're at, aren't we? Like, but by the grace of God, therefore I go. It could be. He was just born into it, right? I mean, that's where he was born. It's where you're born in Gaza. What do you do? That conflict's going to be a part of your life. Yeah. Anybody else? What was something else you guys talked about? Yeah.
It's okay. Two teachers that know, like, doesn't anyone have an answer? Please, somebody raise your hand. Yeah, okay. So
I could be the teacher that just calls on people. Should
well,
I do that?
yeah, and then
that's when nobody comes back.
That's the other thing. I either raise my hand voluntarily or don't make eye contact to be like, oh no, yeah. Now, what was I actually going to share? It's a different question. I've been thinking about during this class, you keep asking for people to talk about other religions, and normally I would love to do that kind of thing. I've been super busy, and I was kind of bummed about it because I remember after 9/11 learning a little bit about the Sikh religion, and I don't know a ton about it other than wearing a turban is like part of it, and because of after 9/11, a lot of people having very little information about Islam in general, and then they find out, okay, these people that did this thing were about this religion I don't really know about, and also they sometimes wear things on their head, and then the Sikh religion people knew about even less than Islam. And I just remember there being a lot of stories on the news, and people that were Sikh saying, we're being confused for being Muslim, and we're not. And also, by the way, like our Muslim friends say, those people aren't representing our religion, they're weaponizing it. And I just remember thinking, there's a whole bunch of people hating people, and they're not even identifying the people they think they're hating. And having nights like last week, once you talk to somebody in another group and you identify them as a person and not, oh, all of the people in this group are one way, I think we get closer to that.
Yeah, that's exactly why. And I do have to say, thank you all so much for being willing to be a part of that conversation, because it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable. And but I think there's some truth to that when we humanize each other, it makes it hard to just like hate a whole group of people, right? It was easy for the Jewish people to hate the Samaritans in general in Jesus' time, but then you meet the woman at the well and you get to know her story. It's a little harder to hate a whole group of people, right? So we start talking to each other in some different ways. And one thing I did post on Facebook is, afterwards we went out to eat, and I think that there's something to the fact that this has been a part of throughout human history, when two groups that may not have always agreed with one another, when they somehow come together and share a meal, there's something cool that happens there, I think. So yeah, it was good to get to do that. And I was just so super proud of you all for engaging in that conversation. I think that was awesome. So May is a happy pastor night. So what other questions? What other things did you guys talk about? I want to keep this going. Yeah. Yes.
I was just sharing with them that when I was in nursing school, long ago and far away, I have a very good friend from school who is Iranian, and she grew up in Iran. She came over here to go to school. Fortunately, had a cousin here that she ended up with in New York City, but she grew up under the Shah, and while we were in school, the Shah was overthrown by the Ayatollah, and all the radical Muslim came in and all of that kind of thing. And he was talking about being afraid, or seeming to be afraid to share much because of social media and whatnot. Well, back in 1978, there was no social media, and she would not talk about it unless she was in a dorm room with the door locked, and it was just the four of us. And she was so afraid that the walls had ears, that somebody was going to hear her. And she also knew that if she went back home, because she'd been in the West, that something would happen to her and she would be dead. So I can understand his fear, because things travel so much faster, but she was so sure that somebody would find out that we were in our little dormitory in a very small hospital campus, not even a big university. And she had to be in there with the door locked and hushed tones. And I understand his fear. I really do. I mean, she understands it more than I do, obviously. But the other thing is, before I went to Israel 3 years ago, I bought a book that I pulled out, and it's called Fast Facts on the Middle East Conflict. And I've been reading it this week. And it is interesting. And he talks about the British. They were playing both ends against the middle because they promised both sides different things. But anyway, it's just, regardless of how you feel about that, it's really interesting, because he goes into the pacts and the treaties and the things that were happening along the way. And, it goes clear back to Isaac and Ishmael, but it also kind of came out of that whole thing, and how Palestine wasn't even a country for a while and all of that kind of thing. So it's just been very, very interesting for me.
One other thing I forgot to mention is I did initially post the picture of us out. I took it down right away after he's like, "Hey, could you not post it?" And I said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't even think of that. I'm really sorry." And he said, "It's not just that I don't want, I'm worried for my family and stuff back there. He's like, I also don't want them to see me just happy and out to eat right now, while they are all in fear. It doesn't feel fair." I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? One other thing, so the first person to post on that was one of my really close Jewish friends. And she just said, essentially, "Thank you for having this conversation. I would also love to eat falafel with him." And I was like, I like that. See, meals. I'm telling you, falafel can save the world. But yes. Oops, there you go.
I listened to some of the president's speech this morning, and he brought up, and I thought it was a very good point, about actually after 9/11 that we really there's this thing called war fever. Mm. And of course we had to react in some way, but now a lot of people say that some of the things we did were a little bit too much, and we made some mistakes. So what he was saying is, he was sure hoping that Israel would show some restraint in that they would care about the Palestinian, just the regular people. And so they can go after Hamas, but to not get war fever here and make some mistakes.
I think it sounded like in the first couple of days that, maybe there was a little bit of that. And I think understandable, right?
Yeah,
Totally understandable. And I don't want to get into all the politics of everything, 'cause I'm not a politician, I'm a pastor.
What's the difference?
There's a big difference. There's a difference. I promise. But I think that, so I think for me, and I don't mean to hijack your response, but I'm gonna. So I think it kind of comes down to this, right? It comes down to this piece. And for me, one of the questions that gets asked, that I have to ask of myself in the middle of these kinds of things, and not just this particular conflict, but conflicts in general. How do I feel in terms of war, in terms of violence, in terms of these kinds of things? There's a couple of different ways to look at it, right? From a Christian perspective, there's, we've got, obviously the Old Testament especially was full of some violence, wasn't it? Right? There was some violence in the Old Testament, especially in the Old Testament, but violence, kind of throughout. And then Jesus also turned some things on its head, doesn't he? Turned some things on its head around, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. And so as followers of Jesus, like, all right, well, that's a thing he said pretty clearly. I just don't know what to do with that. Well, so what does it technically mean to love my neighbor or to love my enemy and all of this kind of stuff? So I think there's a lot of those kind of things that and we do a lot of mental gymnastics. We do a lot of theological gymnastics to try to get, sometimes we try to make, where I always try to watch myself is, I want to do what Jesus said. I don't want to try to make Jesus fit what I feel in some other way. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to try to cram Jesus into, well, this is how I want to believe and feel. So how can I make Jesus' words fit into that? I want to try to take Jesus for who Jesus was and what Jesus was about. And so when you start with Jesus and then look out, it can sometimes change your view of some things. I'll be honest, I still just wrestle with it. I really do. I think that there's something to justice, that there's something to the fact that the people of Israel, God seems to have a special place in his heart for the Jewish people in some way. So I think that there's absolutely something to that, and that there's something to people who are, when the vulnerable and the innocent are harmed, that man, there's some sort of form of justice that needs to happen. But then there's also kind of this other thing that I wrestle with, that's this beating your swords into plowshares thing. That's this way that Jesus seemed to talk about, being the Prince of Peace. And, all right, well, how do we do that, And it's complicated, especially in this particular situation, but it's complicated throughout life, isn't it? It's complicated when your neighbor trims your tree because its branches are hanging over onto his side of the yard, and you get a little ticked off, and maybe he's mowing a little bit too far over, and he can see where the stake is. He knows where it's supposed to be. Like it can get complicated to love that neighbor, right? Does that seem to hit close to home? Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, absolutely. There is very rarely, if ever, been a conflict where somebody didn't think that they were just and had God on their side. Almost always, right? No, I don't think anybody, there's a great, it's a meme of some show, I don't even know what it was, but it's of a soldier, and he's looking at his other friend, he's like, are we the baddies? Are we the bad guys? Like, trying to figure out, oh man, maybe we're the bad guys. Like, nobody goes into a war thinking that they are the bad guys, right? We just generally don't do that. Where for us on the other side, it seems so obvious that they're the bad guys, right? Like it feels really obvious to us who the bad guys are. So, yeah, I mean, this stuff, like, let's just be honest, I wrestle with it. I wrestled with it at September 11th. I remember wrestling with it. I was at Bluffton. I was at this Mennonite pacifist school when Muslim radicals flew planes into the Twin Towers. And my best friend was in boot camp. And I called my mom and said, I'm joining the army. I'm going with them. Who were you fighting? I don't know. Doesn't matter. But I'm going. Like that's how I felt. That's how everybody felt, right? I had pacifist professors who said, man, I'm nonviolent, but when you get punched in the mouth, it makes it hard to be nonviolent sometimes. Easy to be a pacifist in peacetime. Harder when rockets are coming your way, right? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, the problem is when Jesus overturned the tables, it felt like a lot of times he was doing it towards preachers. Like, a lot of times we end up being am I the baddie? Am I the bad guy? I worry about that. But no, I think that's absolutely true. So a couple things, just because it probably didn't get picked up on the microphone for those on video. Yeah, a big part of our call is to pray for people, right? That is who we are as Christians, and we're supposed to be praying for people. I think we're especially called to pray for the vulnerable in these situations. And we're also called, I think, to pray for the leaders on both sides, that God would, move in their hearts, that God would ultimately intervene in some of these places. But yeah, and that's the thing with Jesus that is so. That's why this isn't always cut and dry, right? It's like, yeah, there were times where Jesus seemed to, get riled, And what do we do with that? And how do we fit his context of when that happened with him into our present day context? What are the truths we find out of that? What fits here? What doesn't fit here, right? Who was he getting righteously angry with? And because it's not, righteous anger is a different thing. The problem is, a lot of times what we consider to be righteous anger is just, I think I'm right anger. And those are two different things. But there is such a thing as righteous anger. There is such a thing as man, if you're harming children, there's no excuse. There's no excuse. And there's nothing that you can say that makes me think that's an okay thing to do. And something has to be done to intervene in those situations, and maybe forcefully. And I can understand that. I can fully understand that. Violence and anger for anger's sake or for revenge sake, man, now it's starting to get a little bit hairy, isn't it? So, yeah, so it's hard. It's complicated. So some of this is complicated, yeah. Yeah, a couple more, then we're going to talk about Hinduism, I promise. If the women were in control, none of this would happen. Yeah, that's why my house is so peaceful. The women are always in control. So, always, and that's on tape right now too. Anything else before we move on? I appreciate the discussion, I really do. And I just want to, anything else before we kind of move on into stuff that you wanted to bring up? Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that that's probably true. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah, you can't lump all of the Palestinians in with Hamas. You can't lump every Jewish person in with a Zionist. You can't lump people. But when two sides start fighting, we tend to do that. We tend to say it's all of these and all of these, and violence overflows, and anger overflows. And you're right. I mean, it seemed like it felt in the moment unprovoked. Of course, they would say, well, it's been provoked for the last 50 years, or it's been provoked for the last 100 years or whatever. But that moment, there's no excuse. There's not an excuse for that violence. One thing that was interesting, and I really do want to move on to Hinduism, but that kind of shined a little bit of light on it for me was that there was, and I forget where the interview was, but it was an interview. I think I was listening to a podcast in an interview of some people that had talked to some of the leaders of Hamas, and they said, we didn't think we were going to break through the walls. We were surprised that we were able to, and it's like people got through and didn't know what to do, and so they just started killing. And they were like surprised because they've tried to do this stuff before, and it ends up being a little skirmish, and everybody goes home. And this time they get through, and there's a massacre, and now there's this huge international response, and it's just blowing up. It's blowing up, and it's awful. God cares about human life, I think is a very easy way to say it. God cares about human life, and so that compels me to care about human life, and so I just hate it. I hate that Tarek's family's in harm's way. I hate that my Jewish friend, that her family is over there in harm's way. I hate it, and that's why I ended last time with that quote that Tarek said in Arabic, that I can't repeat it in Arabic, but it's from Darvish, was one of the great Palestinian poet who was all about peace. And his line is, peace for the land that was made for peace and has never known a peaceful day. And that just kind of rings true in my mind, that's been a constant over the years. So keep learning stuff. Keep challenging yourself on it. Keep digging in. This is where, we're going to be talking about this week on Sunday for the sermons. For 38 years, the Israelites were camped in the wilderness just outside of this Gaza-Egypt border that everybody's trying to get through right now. That's where they were camped. So this is our, faith history. This is the land of our faith history. And so, keep watching, keep learning, keep praying for people. And again, thank you so much for being willing to have these conversations. These are conversations that not a lot of people are willing to have, especially not in churches. It can be dangerous for a pastor to have these conversations in churches. Thank you for not firing me. But or is the jury still out? Okay. But these are hard conversations to have. They're uncomfortable conversations to have, but they stretch us, and I think ultimately they can help to grow our faith. So thank you for doing that. All right. Can we talk about Hinduism? All right, let's talk about Hinduism for just a little bit. Interestingly, if you would have asked me about a year ago, said, hey, you're going to talk about religion, and there's going to be like a big war going on, who's involved? I would have said, it's this. It's going to be Pakistan and India, and the Muslims and the Hindus. But, and there's actually a little bit, there's rumbles right now, but so far the volcano has not erupted there. But let's talk about Hinduism just a little bit. Hinduism is, all right, don't try to compare it in any way, in any framework that you have for Christianity. It's not the same. We've been talking about the Abrahamic faiths, right? We've been talking about the ones they've got their basis in Abraham. We have a guy, right? We kind of generally agree that this God created, and then it kind of led up to this certain people group, and then they kind of lived in this certain area. Put all of that over in a box over here today. You're not going to use any of it, okay? Because that's not where this came from. This does not originate with a person. There's no one that they look back to and say, well, that's our founder. There's none of that. It's just this collection of really diverse traditions that kind of came together in a certain region of the world. There's not necessarily an origin. There's not necessarily a founder. One of the big principles that plays throughout, it is a complex religion. It is a way of life kind of religion. It's all-encompassing, okay? But Dharma is, if there was one principle that I had to say, this is their defining principle, it's Dharma. And Dharma doesn't have, there's almost every word that I'm going to tell you tonight doesn't have a very good English translation, so I'm going to have to muddle through it, okay? But Dharma, it really talks about your moral order, your duty, who you were born to be, where you fit, living into your place. It's the correct conduct for a person according to their level of awareness. This is who you are meant to be. So in everything, not just people, everything has a dharma. The dharma of a lion is to eat baby antelope and to roam the plains of Africa and to be mighty and to roar. This is the dharma of a lion, okay? What's the dharma of a farmer? So, if you, and if you were born and everything in you, your skill set shows that you are a farmer, well, then you better live into what that looks like. And you better stay in your place, but you also better really give it your all, put everything you have into it. So that's kind of a muddy view of what Dharma is. That's the best definition I can give you. What I can tell you is that there's all of these different paths, and it's not just like one linear path. There's all these different traditions and groups of people who have various understandings of Hinduism. Think about how many Christian denominations there are. Multiply it. And they don't have a point of origin and they break off from each other. They've all just kind of run down throughout the years. And they mix in and amongst one another. And they've developed over millennia of practice. A lot of it tends to be regional in Hinduism. And how you practice your faith varies on where you're living and that kind of thing. Here's where it seems to have developed, is the Indus Valley. So, what two countries did I say? Pakistan and India, right? Okay, so that line between the two has been there for since the 70s, okay? So this is not we've always been Pakistan, we've always been India kind of thing. Actually, This is the Indus River. It's not even in India, okay? Except for like up here a little bit, it gets into India, I think, somewhere. But this is the general region that the things that we call Hinduism kind of developed. There were advanced urban centers. There were cities, big old cities that were there in the 2500 to 1500 BC era. Okay, so long time ago, Moses and the Israelites, and before that, and while stuff's going on with pyramids in Egypt, there were guys over here in India doing their thing, okay, in this Indus Valley civilization. The Indus Valley civilization is this brownish area that you're seeing here. So a lot of it was in Pakistan, some of it was in India. You'll see that it ends up really kind of moving over mostly into India later on. So there is a theory that is called the Aryan invasion theory that speculates that the way some of the practices, the more written down substantial practices of Hinduism began, is that it was a group of people called the Aryans. This was not Hitler and his buddies, okay? This is a different people group, but probably from more European, probably a little bit more what we would consider Caucasian, that came down into this area via the Silk Road, via some trade routes, and may have brought some of their ideas of faith and religion with them. And so that maybe the Vedas, which we're going to get to those in just a second, the Vedas, which are kind of their scriptures, were written by these invading people and not by the people living here themselves. Now, I will tell you that is a very highly contested view. The problem is we have no idea who wrote the Vedas, right? We have no idea who actually wrote these things. They're so old, and it didn't really matter to them who wrote them. Like, for us, what do we do in our books of the Bible? We really want to know who wrote it, don't we? I want to know if Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. I want to know if King David wrote the Psalms. I want to know if Matthew wrote Matthew, if Mark wrote Mark. If, we care about that stuff. They do not care who wrote it. They just care that it was written and that we have it, and it's lovely. So Aryan invasion theory that's a thought of how some of this got more formalized, but it's pretty widely rejected by most Hindus. Most Hindus would say, no, we did this ourselves. We didn't need your help. Thank you very much. So take that for what it's worth. The Vedas, it does actually seem, if you actually ask Hindu scholars, and actually I think most other scholars would agree, that they started off as an oral tradition, like the scriptures did, right? Started off as an oral tradition a long time ago, they would say. A long time ago. 8,000 to 6,000 years ago, there's some evidence that man, maybe they were already talking about some of these things. And it's in about 1500 that these Vedas are composed, okay? That they start to write these things down. It's written in Sanskrit. There are 4 Vedas. We have a Holy Bible. Sure, it's got an Old and New Testament. Old and New Testament would be like a section of one of these Vedas. They are long, okay? These are really, really long. There's the Rig Veda. It is the oldest and most powerful of the Vedas, of the books that they have. It is the foundation of Hinduism. It talks a lot about some of the origins of things. It talks a little bit about some of their deities. But it's the oldest. There's the Samaveda. It's got a lot of chants and mantras in it. We're going to talk about what mantras are here in a minute. Closest thing I can relate it to is kind of like a prayer, but it's more than a prayer. It's like a centering kind of thing, which centering becomes a really big deal. If you are trying to live into your dharma, I want to center myself in my dharma of who I am and what I'm about. There's the Yajurveda, and does anybody in here speak any sort of Indian languages? Fantastic. So I pronounced that perfect then. The Yajurveda is ritual and worship formulas. Think of it as kind of like a hymnal, kind of like a book of worship that we would have. But it has more than that. Like, it tells you how to do all of the rituals for all. And there's a ritual for everything. Everything, okay? There's a lot of different stuff. Worship happens, they have a very specific liturgy for everything that they do. And depending on what God you are worshiping at that point in time, depending on all sorts of different things. And then there's Atharva Veda. That's right, Atharva Veda. I practiced it. Atharva Veda. It's spells and formulas for magic, okay? And it's ways of getting the gods to convince her to love you and to protect your home from a storm and to help ensure a good crop harvest. And it's all of these different kinds of things, different prayers, different spells, different formulas for all of these things. If I pray these in a certain way, this thing will happen. And again, these are all written in Sanskrit. Probably the most famous of the mantras that comes from the Vedas is called the Gayatri Mantra. And it's a daily prayer that they pray. They pray it every single day, okay? I'm not going to try to read it in their language, but and it's especially prayed by the upper caste Hindus, most of whom in the highest up class is the Brahmins. The Brahmins are the priests, okay? So it's time for y'all to start treating me with some more respect, highest class. But that is the highest class. This is but almost everybody also prays this. And the best translation for this, there's not a good English translation for this. For instance, have you ever heard like somebody kind of making a joke about like how the Hindus pray and what do they do at the beginning? They go, right? And the reason is this isn't necessarily a word. This is the origin sound of the universe. That is what they believe that to be. This is what the sound was at the start of the universe. It was So Bur, Buva, and I'm not going to try to do the rest. But it essentially means we meditate on the glory of that being who has produced this universe. May he enlighten and inspire our minds. Okay. Now, real quick, we'll bring back over our Christianity box for just a second. If I understood that being to be God, I could pray this, couldn't I? Like, I want God to inspire me, to enlighten, to teach me things. So this is not like that crazy of an idea, right? So we can buy into that a little bit. But they have a different idea of who that being is. And we will talk about that in a minute because it's much different than what it is and it isn't. It's different. Okay. There's a similarity that I found to be fascinating that I think you guys will too when we get to that. But this is their mantra that they pray every day. Outside of the Vedas, the four Vedas, these four main scriptures that they have something else called the Upanishads. Upanishads are teachings from highly realized spiritual masters. They're like the philosophers. They're like the early church fathers for us. They are... They are the gurus. They are the ones that they've gotten as close as possible. They wrote some stuff down. And by the way, the goal in most ways of thinking, the goal is to become so centered, so at one with your Dharma, so at one with all of these things that you reach this enlightenment that ultimately kicks you out of this seemingly endless cycle of rebirth, right? That you ultimately you realize you are fully realized in the universe. So Upanishads, they are teachings from these people, and so they talk about some different things. And so in the Upanishads, they kind of give some instruction on how to be a good Hindu. They talk about the Brahmin. Brahmin is their closest thing that we would have to God, the Creator, Father, okay? That's Brahman, is the supreme reality, but he's not necessarily just a deity. He is the essence of the universe itself, right? And again, if you pull your Christian box out for just a minute, him the eye does not see, nor the tongue express, nor the mind grasp, right? We've said stuff like that before, right? Maybe not those exact words, but he is the image of the invisible God, right? Like we've said things like that. No eye has seen, no ear has heard. We've said things like that. And so the Upanishads also talk about the Atman, which is really the soul. And so it says this, that you as a person, your existence is in your soul. Your body doesn't matter. Your body's just a vessel for your Atman, for your soul. And because of reincarnation, right? Because of reincarnation, that's the transmigration of your soul from one body to the next, right? So if I do a pretty good job in this life, in the next life, get a little bit better body. And not only a better body, but I'm born probably in a little bit higher status, right? I get to start on second base or on third base, right? I don't have to go back and start over all again. I've done a pretty good job in this life. If I'm already on third base, but I'm pretty much a jerk in this life, next life, I got to go back to second. And eventually you get all the way back to being like a worm or something. I don't know. But your Atman, your soul, is who you actually are. And so the good things that we do, or the bad things that we do, you've heard this phrase. We use this phrase in our society, karma, right? You've heard of karma before. We've kind of adopted that term in some ways in our society, right? And it means like, I do good things and good things happen to me. I do bad things and bad things happen to me. We don't necessarily, as Christians, believe in the idea of karma. Actually, this is where we differ quite a bit, right? We really don't believe that much in karma. We believe in something that's a little bit opposite of that. It's called grace. I do bad things, and man, Jesus still loves me. How crazy is that? While I was still a sinner, Christ died for me, right? So we don't really, this might make sense in some ways in the world, but that's just really not what we believe, right? And people who are jerks, and they've got really nice houses, and things are going very well for them, right? So we know that sometimes we don't get what we deserve, and sometimes we get what we don't deserve. And that somewhere in there, grace plays a part. So that's not really our thing, but that's their thing, and it's a thing that we've kind of adopted in society in some ways. Samsara is the idea of the worldly cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and I'm going to dive into that just a little bit more. And then this is what you're going for, moksha, liberation. I've finally gotten so good. I am so at one. My karma has been so good. I've realized my dharma, and so now I get moksha, and I'm liberated from this endless cycle of rebirth and reincarnation, and I get to go to paradise. Yay! And I'm out of all of this sort of thing. So so what are some ways that it's different from Christianity? Here, it's entirely dependent on me and my actions, right? And in Christianity, that's just not the case, right? I'm saved by grace alone, through faith alone, through Christ alone. That's it. But here, it's a little bit different way of looking at it. So, all right. What did I do to my computer? All right. So, not only do people go through these cycles, but they also believe that the world goes through these cycles. And there's something else. The Upanishads, remember, is this big collection of teachings and stuff like that. The Puranas are fish that will eat you in the Amazon, and they are also something else. They are these epic poems. Think the Odyssey and the Iliad, okay? Except for 10 times as long. Longest poems written in the world are these Puranas. They are massive, super duper long, and they tell these big epic stories, long epic narratives and poems. And two of them are called the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, or whatever. You see the word. But they present the world itself as cyclical. And they would say that each cycle, this blew my mind. I did not know this. Each cycle lasts 4,320,000 years. Okay? So there's cycles to everything. And it's divided, each of these cycles is divided into 4 ages or yugas. There's the Krita, which is kind of the first age. And in that age, Dharma is natural. Of course, everybody, think Garden of Eden a little bit. Everybody's just doing before the tree. Everybody's doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. They're living the way they're supposed to be living. Everything lives according to the way it was created. There's the Treta, where people need to be taught proper roles in society. So they've fallen away a little bit. Okay, this is sounding a little bit familiar, isn't it? They've fallen away a little bit, and they need to be retaught who they're supposed to be. The Dvapara is the age in which people begin to lose their altruism, which is a huge part of what you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be kind to others. I was talking to somebody, you were in Bombay for a while, right? Everybody's very nice to each other, aren't they? Kindest people, right? And altruism, values, like those kind of things, super important people. And so people begin to lose this in this age. And then the Kali is when the world is at its worst. There's egotism, there's war, there's all this stuff. Anybody want to guess which age they think we're in right now? I've got good news for you, though. They've actually measured this out. This age, this Kali age, started in 3102 BC, okay? So we've been in this age for a little while, and we've got some time to go yet. It won't end until 428,899 Common Era, right? So we've got some time. Y'all will be long gone before it's over. But, and that's when they believe that at the end, and I forget which god, I'll look it up in just a minute, but one of the gods they believe will come down and basically end it, but then start the cycle back over again. End it and then recreate it, start the cycle back over again. They don't look at time. The reason I wanted you to notice, they don't look at time as linear. Time is cyclical. So this is an endless amount of cycles that have been going on forever and ever and ever in their minds. Okay? So yeah, I don't know what happened a year before that, but it must have been bad, whatever it was. Destroyed everything, right? All right, so again, we've been talking about Dharma a little bit, and it's the order and custom that sustains life. I've really kind of talked about that a little bit already. Right way of living, all that stuff. But if you're going to be doing that, what this has given rise to, if you are born a certain way, into a certain family, you should act accordingly. And so this ended up kind of getting segmented out. Anybody remember what those are called in India? What? Caste. Yes, the caste. The top one is obviously the gods, right? And then just below that, you've got the Brahmins. These are the religious and intellectual leaders, right? These are your priests, these are your professors, these are your gurus. That's who's up there at the top, okay? So, Brahmin. You have that one. This caste is, these are your soldiers, okay? They're your soldiers, and they're also your politicians, okay? Your soldiers and your political leaders are in this one. The Vaisyas are trade and business people. Farmers, a lot of times, will also fall into this category, although sometimes farmers are down in Sudras. Depends on what you're farming. And so this is the next caste. And then manual labor jobs. You're working in a factory, you're doing those kinds of things. You're going to be Sudras. So then there was also like this group of people that they didn't really know what to do with. Leather workers, street cleaners, people who deal with sewage. And so they become casteless, and there was another word for them that was untouchables. Based on where you are in this order, this is a hierarchy. And the closer you are to the top, the more access to resources you have. Homes, financial resources, all sorts of things like that. You've got very little access to things down here. What do you think there was the most of? It was down here. And so there's very few at the top. So, and a lot of people down here at the bottom. So, for 100 Hindu temple points, I don't know if I can give you church points for this, but so who in the mid to late 1800s and early 1900s started speaking out against the caste system? Really famous person. Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. He was somebody who was a little bit higher up in the caste system. He was a lawyer, right? So almost up to the second tier up there. Could have considered him that as a political leader, but he said this is not right, and he saw the plight of the untouchables. And the problem is that the Vedas, these 4 Vedas and the way that they're interpreted, that is the law of the land in India. Okay? So that's a problem, right? And the way that it was interpreted was that there's these people that are untouchable, and he was saying that's not a good interpretation. There was nothing in Hinduism, like how can we be altruistic, but then also say that there's these people that are untouchable? Like that's not, it doesn't make sense. And so he started organizing them, these peasants, the farmers, the laborers, because these guys were getting dumped on, you know. I mean, this is who you tax. This is who you keep under your thumb. And he worked to legally end untouchability, which also had some religious implications, didn't it? Because that's basically saying, hey, a part of your scripture, you're not doing it right, and we're going to protest until you start reading your scripture right. It's kind of what they were saying. A lot of nonviolence, nonviolence resistance. Martin Luther King Jr. studied what he did, and that was really a big part of how King came to do the things the way that he did them. And he ended up being assassinated by a Hindu militant who believed that he was being too accepting of Indian and Pakistani Muslims. So these two are kind of living, these two religious groups and countries are kind of living side by side, and there's been tension forever. He was reaching across the table and doing interfaith prayer services with Muslims, not just from India, but also from Pakistan, and he was killed for it. And this was one of his big sayings, especially as it related to India. God is truth, and the way to truth lies through ahisma, which means nonviolence. So that was kind of his calling card, saying like, I want to know more. If I'm trying to center myself, if I'm trying to center my dharma and live into the truth of who I was created to be, the way to do that lies through nonviolence. I can't discover who I am if I'm out hurting people, if I'm out harming other people. So, super interesting guy. Probably the most famous Hindu you know is Mahatma Gandhi. So, let's talk a little bit about their deities. They're called devas. Devas are deities that control the forces in the cosmos. They consecrate every single part of life. There's a lot, 330 million of them-ish, right? There's a lot, but there's ones for like every little thing. Every family has their own personal deity, their own personal devas. And then there's ones for rain, there's ones for the sun, there's one for the moon, there's one for everything you could think of. So a few of them that you might have heard of before. Indra is the god of thunder and the bringer of rains, right? Agni is the god of fire. Soma associated with sacred drink. Usha is a goddess of dawn. But this also blew my mind because I didn't know that they even referred to it this way. They also have something called the Trimurti, which roughly translates to the Trinity. And these are their big three, okay? Their big three. It's Brahma, the creator. Brahma has 4 faces, one that faces each of the cardinal directions, so it's all seeing, right? You have Vishnu in the middle, the preserver, like the sustainer of life kind of person. And then at the end, you've got Shiva, who is the destroyer, who, this is the one, Shiva's the one who ultimately, when the world gets too bad, and like 400,000 years from now, Shiva's on his way, whatever it is, and going to come destroy everything. So I also want to give a special mention too, because one of the most popular of the Hindu gods in the Hindu pantheon is actually Ganesha. Ganesha has the head of an elephant, is the son of Shiva, the destroyer, but Ganesha's role is the remover of obstacles. So if you are a person who practices the Hindu faith, and man, I just need a raise, I would pray to Ganesha to remove whatever obstacles are in the way for me to be able to attain this raise. It takes the bad things out of the way, that moves the bad things out of the way. So a lot of prayer to Ganesha for those kinds of things, just in general, remover of obstacles. So there's also some holy days or holidays. They've got a lot, okay, but a couple that you might be at least mildly familiar with. Diwali, we're coming up on Diwali time. It's early November, I think, something like that. And the festival is associated with another goddess, Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. But this is kind of like their Christmas, okay? This is their version of, it's a festival of light. It's light over darkness. The light has come into the world, and the darkness cannot overcome it. That kind of thing, right? Mildly familiar to you guys. And so the word Diwali actually comes from a Sanskrit word meaning rows of lighted lamps. So if you go interestingly, when I lived in Lewis Center, we had a large Hindu population in the area. And so around this time of year, we'd start to see lights go up. They're usually purple, orange, yellow, those kinds of colors. And it's like, Halloween? Is it just fall? Thanksgiving lights? Are we doing that now? And I said, no, it's Diwali. And they celebrate this, that light does overcome darkness, is the general sense of things. And so we saw a lot of homes that would be decorated for that. They decorate in a similar way, not as extravagantly as we do for Christmas with lights and things of that nature. So it's a very sacred time. There's also one called Holi, and it's in the spring. It's probably the thing we could associate closest to Easter, although there's no resurrection thing happening with it. It's popular and significant because it's a festival of color, of love, of spring, of new life, of new birth, of all these things. The eternal and divine love, it really celebrates the marriage of these two deities. And so it's this big festival that celebrates that. And so you see, this is them celebrating that. Anybody ever done a color run? You know what I'm talking about? Like when you do a 5K and they throw all the colored powders at you and stuff like that. So that's what it is, except for they don't run; they just throw the powder. But it's this festival of color, and they have these huge festivals where there's just everything is colorful And it's just a celebration of basically of the good things in the world, of new life, of love, of all of that. So that's what that holly is. So there's a couple of different ways, there's a lot of different ways that worship happens in Hinduism, but two distinct ways. It's called puja, is the word for worship. Oftentimes you'll go to a temple. At the temple, there's so many different rituals, there's some really fascinating, like National Geographic documentaries out there. Watch one sometime just to watch like the intricacies of all the little things, the foods that are eaten, the ways that millions of people make pilgrimages to these temples. This is a large religion, okay? India is now, if it isn't already, it's about to become the most populous country on the planet, and almost all of them are Hindu. So there's over 1 billion Hindus on the planet, okay? A lot. This is not just a small couple million group of people, okay? More Hindus than people that live in the United States by several factors. So it's a lot of people. But many times they will go to a temple. A temple is believed to be the earthly seat for a particular deity. They will oftentimes have an idol of that deity in there. This is an image of one of them. And what they will do is they will come, and there's rituals that you're supposed to do with this idol. But they are sacred spaces. Gods partake of human offerings. You always bring an offering of some sort, usually a food offering. A lot of times you bathe the gods in different ways. You can also do this at home. And many homes, I would say most homes, if they are serious practicing Hindus, will have a puja room in their home where they have an idol of some sort, usually their family idol, maybe one that just means a lot to them for some reason. And so you can do this at home. Also, if you don't feel like going to temple, you can do it at home. You just have to follow the 16 steps. So there are 16 steps to a worship service or a puja. The first is the invocation. So the deity is invited to the ceremony from one's heart. Then the deity is offered a seat, which is great because they're already sitting. The deity's feet are then washed. You wash their feet. Water is offered to wash the head and the body, wash the mouth. Water is offered for symbolic bathing, like so you wash the deity. And then there's like usually a cloth of some sort that's wrapped around the image and ornaments affixed to it. And then there's perfumes and ointments, and so like there's this whole like ritual that you do. There's usually a burning lamp that's waved in some way. Foods are sometimes offered, and then you bow, you prostrate yourself, you pay homage to them. And sometimes there's circumambulation, which is one of my favorite big words, which just means you dance around it. And then you basically say amen. So you can perform this ceremony at home, and you learn to do this. And this is something you would do as a family or something like that. So really interesting. Most people have a puja somewhere in their home. So what are the issues with Hinduism today? In the last few minutes, I'll address a few things, and then we'll do some questions, and then we'll be done. But one of the big issues today is still caste issues. So trying to figure out how do they live in a modern society where you don't get to oppress people like that. So mostly in society, caste issues are kind of dwindling away, at least as much as they are in places like here. We don't call it a caste, but you know who looks like they belong and who doesn't, right? We still do that. We still have hierarchies of things. The place where this really matters is in marriage and in dating. So I've only seen examples, not that I've been on these dating sites, these Hindu dating sites, but it used to be, and some people will still will say, I'm a 30-year-old male, I live in this region, and I'm a Brahmin. right? Like, so, like, this is where I'm at in my caste. Like, they would include their caste in their dating profile. And today, you're starting to see from some of the millennials and whatnot starting to say, no caste preference. Ooh. How do you think mom and dad feel about that? Not great, right? And so there's a lot of that kind of conflict that's happening between younger generations and those who have always grown up in this caste system, who have always grown up with that. So that's one thing. Diaspora. Diaspora is just as it was for the Jewish people, there is a diaspora that has happened amongst the Hindu culture. So this all developed where? Mostly in India, some in Pakistan, but most of that, because of borders and politics and things, ended up in India, except for who did we blame for the Israel-Palestine conflict? The British. It's their fault here too. And the British were very, very heavily involved in India, to the point that it caused some people to flee, political rivals to flee, take refugee status in other places. And then also there's just been movement throughout the world. Like, we do that now. The world's gotten to be a place where, I can move to. Is anybody, and here's what I mean by this. Anybody ever go down, I lived on East Hardin Street over here, and before we moved out to the farm. And there's a couple of apartment complexes there. And in one of the apartment complexes, if you walk by at night, it's just curry. Like, that's all you can smell is curry. Because there happened to be some really good jobs at Marathon. And there were some people from India who happened to be Hindu who want to come, get a good job over here. And, anybody ever have a doctor from India? Bet you have. And there's some great jobs and opportunities here. Where's the closest Hindu temple? I don't know. I'm sure there's a place to worship somewhere, but it's hard. How do you practice your faith with no? And the problem is, just like I couldn't say, if I went to a place where there was no Christianity or something like that, it'd be hard for me to come say, well, I'm going to go. We've got a few of us here. We're going to develop a Christian church, and they would say, well, do you mean like a Catholic one? You're not a priest. And no, I meant like a Methodist one. Like, well, you guys baptize babies, so I'm not coming, right? So there's some of that. They have so many different flavors to it that there's very rarely a concentration enough to have just this kind of temple, right? So makes it hard. And then they become enculturated in these other places, and they lose because their faith is so tied into their culture. So that's one issue that Hinduism is facing today. And then the other one is just some of the regional issues going on there. You've got global conflict. India and Pakistan are pointing missiles at each other. War is always on the table. It's probably one of our largest threats to a nuclear engagement, just because they both could. And diplomacy's not always been very good. And then they've also got just this massive population growth with not enough resources. And so it's just like in Christianity. It's hard to tell somebody about Jesus when their belly's rumbling too loud to hear you, right? And so faith is taking a back seat to, I need food, I need sanitation, I need health care, I need these kinds of things. I got to put food on the table. That God's not getting any. It's hard. So those are some of the main issues that they're kind of facing today. So, questions? Where do they worship? In temples. There's several different there's a lot of different temples. Like there's going to be different temples in every town. There's 330 million deities, right? So they're not all for the same. It's not just like, I'm going to go practice Hinduism today. It's, I'm going to go worship Vishnu today. I'm going to go worship Brahma today. Like, so there's all these different spots where they go to worship. And so it's usually not, I'm going to come in and listen to a pastor or something like that. It's, I go in, I make my offering, I perform the ceremony, I get out. Nope. Not usually. Sometimes you'll go and you'll sit and listen to a guru. That'll sometimes happen at a temple. That'll sometimes happen in some other places. So sometimes you'll do that. Usually what you will do is it's a whole lot more one-on-one. Almost every person, and this is a thing that we could learn, right, from Hinduism. Almost every person in Hinduism has somebody that they would consider their guru. You're teaching me, right? And I'm learning from you. A lot of one-on-one interaction with it, and a lot less everybody sit here and listen to some knucklehead up front talk. It's a lot more of that. We would call that discipleship. Ooh, what a fancy idea, right? They're much better at that. They do that really well. So, other questions? Yes? Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, like you would want to lift up the lower caste just in case you actually stink in this life and you come back as one of them. You would probably not do it in one shot, but you're always hoping that you're getting a little better, right? You're hoping that you're getting a little better each time, that karma, and that you're eventually in moksha and you're getting out of here and you're not coming back anymore. Like, so that's the ultimate goal. I would guess there's very few people who think, yeah, I'm probably a worm in the next life. Like, because most people have a pretty high opinion of themselves and how well they're doing things. But I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Yes? Do they have social programs to help the less fortunate? Yes, they do. Because that is a way to, it's a good, like they see that as a good thing. Altruism, helping the less fortunate, all of these things. These are things you're supposed to do. This is a part of your dharma. This is how you earn karma. Is you get good points for going and helping the less fortunate. It looks good on you. And I'm sure there's some that do it just because out of the goodness of their hearts. But from a religious standpoint, yes, these are things you are supposed to do. Yep. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Great. Yeah. So a book, it's called Caste, and it talks about America's hidden caste system. And yeah, I mean, we just haven't formalized it. But there's some people that live in the nice part of town, and there's some people who don't, and there's people that, you know, they're a little bit more down here and that kind of thing. And we like to think that we all interact with each other, but we don't always, you know. So yeah, this isn't a totally unique thing that they only do that there. They just put a name to it, which feels a little on the nose. And yeah. So. Anybody else? missionaries? No, actually they don't. And a part of the reason is they have, I mean, I didn't even get into this part, but they have a very accepting view of other faiths. They've already got 330 million gods. What's one more? I mean, it's not like they're like, yeah, sure, that could be another path. Like they're generally speaking okay with you being another faith. They don't think you have to be this. You're probably not as good as them, but you don't have to convert to what they are. They see other religions generally as legitimate. Very tolerant, yes, that would be, yep. Except for with their Muslim neighbors, but that's more political than it is religious in a lot of ways. The Muslims really wanted to convert them. They're like, why? It's just like, let's just all be the thing. So yeah, I won't get into all that. That could take all night. So, sorry. It was not like super widespread, where wives burn themselves with their husbands and that kind of thing. Actually, there's been quite a growth in, I guess we would call it feminism, but they would call it more of understanding, oh yeah, about half our deities are women. That we're on equal footing in so many ways. And so it's not as patriarchal in that sense as what it used to be, where she was basically just an accessory for her husband. But it was more pocketed and not super widespread. But yeah, those things happened. Yep. All right. Thank you guys so much for the conversation. Let me pray us out. So next week, shortened class. We'll do Buddhism. Similar and related in some ways. So, and Buddhism's like almost a pseudo-religion. We'll talk about it next week. But let me pray for us. So God, thank you for a chance to get together tonight. Thank you for great conversation. Thank you for a chance to learn a little bit more about why it is that we follow you. And how 1 billion people on this planet live and think and believe. People that you know, that you love, and that you care about. And we pray, God, that you would just help us to continue to learn more and to get to know our neighbors more, even our neighbors who are sometimes all the way around the world and sometimes live in apartment buildings real close to us, who believe in these different ways, so that we can maybe find ways to show them a little bit more of your love, a little bit more of your grace and how good grace is, and lead them to come to know just how wide and long and high and deep your love for them truly is. We love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. Have a great night, everybody.